I'm going to spend a minute with you, or a few minutes with you, summarizing what we'll talk about in our first introductory lecture in general anatomy and physiology. The primary goals of this first lecture include introducing some terms that we'll use. The first terms are anatomy and, of course, physiology. We are going to talk about some directions that we use to describe a specimen or a body, or describe structures in relationships in relationship to one another. So terms like anterior and posterior and superior and inferior, medial and lateral, we will use those terms. And in fact, we will discuss a reference point for the body called anatomical position. We'll talk about how we can divide the body into planes or sections. So we'll talk about the planes like a mid-sagittal plane or just a regular sagittal plane, a coronal or a transverse plane as well. We will talk about body regions, and you'll be required to memorize a list of body regions, like the cephalic region or the orbital region, or the axilla or axillary region, the brachium and the antebrachium. We will talk about body cavities, ventral and dorsal body cavities. And we'll subdivide these main cavities into cavities like the thoracic cavity and the abdominal cavity, or the abdominal pelvic cavity. And dorsal body cavity, we'll subdivide that into the cranial cavity and the vertebral cavity. And then we'll talk about a major concept in anatomy and physiology, which is homeostasis. Homeostasis is the term that we use to describe the body maintaining a constant internal environment despite changes in the external environment, or even in the internal environment, but maintaining a constant value or environment. So like maintaining constant body temperature, maintaining a consistent pH, for example, maintaining a stable blood glucose values. Those are all examples of variables which must be maintained, and we call that maintenance of those variables or those internal conditions, maintaining homeostasis. And homeostasis is maintained via two major loops: positive and negative feedback loops. And so these are the major ideas that we will cover in our first lecture, our first introductory lecture to anatomy and physiology. Let's get started. So let's go back, and we will start at our first item, and we will define anatomy and physiology. If I were going to define anatomy, I would define anatomy as the study of the structures of the body, and I'm just putting this into my own terms. It's the study of the structures of the body. For example, if we were to learn about the heart, we would learn about its valves and the type of tissues that comprise the heart. And we would study the muscle of the heart and how it's oriented. So studying structure is the study of anatomy, structure of a body or an organism. When we study physiology, we are studying how that structure, or how the anatomy of an organism works. So we could call it the study of an organism's function. Let me provide a little analogy for you that might help you understand these terms a little bit better. If we were making an analogy, and I'm going to draw for you the state of Wisconsin. All right, this is admittedly not very good. but something like this. And you'll probably ask yourself if he even knows what the state looks like. But anyhow, this is Wisconsin. And of course, this is where we live here in Green Bay. And the city of Milwaukee would be like right down here. And then we would find right down here the city of Chicago, which is, of course, in Illinois. Now, if we were studying the anatomy of the state of Wisconsin, we would be learning about the location of Green Bay and the location of Milwaukee and the location of Chicago. And we might even know something about the location of roadways that connect Green Bay to Milwaukee and to Chicago or to Madison, right? And so in studying anatomy, we learn about where and how structures are connected to one another and how they fit in the overall landscape of an organism. Now, physiology is the study of function. So if we were to apply this analogy to physiology, we might say that in Green Bay, people in Green Bay make paper. And that paper gets shipped to places like maybe Milwaukee or Chicago, and then Chicago uses that paper to make paper airplanes that they ship to China. I don't think that's actually how that works. But understanding what Green Bay does and how it relates to Milwaukee and Chicago, and then what Chicago does with that particular product made in Green Bay, that's an example of function. And so how something works, how the heart works, how the kidneys work, and how they work together, how the nervous system works with muscle, that's an example of physiology. So those are our first two terms, and we will have lots of terms as we progress through this class, but those terms are fundamental to your success in this particular class. Now,